Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is that you're going to be seeing this. Welcome. If you happen to catch me live, let me know where you are listening in from or watching from. And if you catch this on the replay, then put hashtag replay in the comments so that I know that you came in, and let me know where you're listening in from as well. So, this is my second time using Restream, and I already did a mess up and had to start again. So, here we are. We are back again. But anyway, hopefully you've missed all of that. But today we are speaking about surviving toxic work environments. And if you have ever or are in a space where you felt that your confidence has been chipped away, and the thing is, it's not big, obvious facts. It's usually not overt, it's usually covert. It's subtle. You may be dealing with microaggressions, you may be dealing with micromanagement to the degree that it's making you feel less than competent. You might be dealing with bullying, or just feeling overlooked. You don't have a voice, don't have a say, and it's happening over and over again. More than likely you're in a toxic work environment, and sadly those spaces are more common than we like to admit. But what I'd like to ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you find how easy do you find it to protect your energy in those spaces, where in those toxic environments? Let me make sure that I make that question clear. How easy do you find it to protect your energy on a scale of 1 to 10 in toxic environments? Because for many of us, and I speak about toxic environments not because it's just a buzzword, because I've lived it. I've been in environments that have been extremely toxic. I worked in an office on one occasion where it was like a war zone, to the point where on at least two occasions there were people nearly coming to fisticuffs. Never got to it, but you just thought to yourself, hold on, this is a place of work, supposed to be professional, but here we are, just at the edge of brawling. I've been there, I've seen it. And it's not a safe space to be in. It's not a comfortable place to be in. It causes a lot of discomfort, it causes a lot of anxiety, and for a space where you spend the most of your time during the day, it can be really uncomfortable, to say the least. I remember, like I said, being in a space where there was lots of conflicts, people going at each other, and what it does is it takes away from the work at hand. And as a manager, I found myself having to deal with personal conflicts between staff rather than actually dealing with the important work that we had to do at hand. And it can be draining, it is exhausting, and it just makes you wonder what on earth is happening with some people, where they would prefer to come into work and just deal, and rather than deal with the work at hand, just bring in all of the issues that they have. But that's a whole other thing, because we are all dealing with our own issues, and sometimes it spills out and makes us behave in ways that we would prefer not to. But can you relate to that? Have you been in environments? Okay, what I've just explained may be a little bit extreme, but have you been in an environment where you started questioning your competence, where your capabilities, you're starting to question that as well, because you're being made to feel that you're not good enough? Have you been in those spaces? Type a yes in the comment. You may be there right now. And if it feels uncomfortable to actually say that, I'm actually looking to see if I can open the chats on the side so that I don't miss anything that comes in. Actually, because the last video I did, comments were left, and to this day I can't see the comments. So yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that I can see the comments. But how if you feel uncomfortable talking about your place of employment, and I can totally understand that. This is being streamed on LinkedIn, and it's also being streamed on YouTube, and I'm very aware that if you are watching this on LinkedIn, you will have work colleagues who may or may not be watching too, and may or may not be looking at your profile, and that's a worrying thing too. Side note, if you are watching this on wherever it is that you're watching, and you want to show up and show more confidence online, and you want to show your knowledge, your skills, your expertise, but you're worried about how to show up and you don't want to fall foul of work policies, you want to make sure that you're maintaining your reputation and that of your organization as well. I've created the LinkedIn Post with Confidence guide, and that is absolutely free. And it gives you some tips and things that you need to be clear of and aware of, so that when you do show up online, you can show up with the confidence that you are not bringing your company into this ill repute, that you are maintaining your reputation, and you can show up as an authority, not just because you're in this particular organization, but to show up as an authority in your own right. So download the LinkedIn Post with Confidence guide. It's called the LinkedIn Post with Confidence guide, but the guidelines in there will help you on any social media platform, so that you can show up without worrying about how it's going to appear to your colleagues. What you do know, though, is that whether you like it or not, your colleagues are always going to be watching. They will always, if they were anything like my former colleagues, they're going to go back and speak to the manager, even if what you post is nothing untoward. That's what's happened. That's what happened to me. I just posted something just simple and normal, and I had managers who were not on LinkedIn coming to me and saying, "Oh, I heard you posted about blah blah blah," and it was nothing wrong with what I posted. It's just people like to speak and just like to talk and like to spread gossip. So if you're worried about that, download the guide for free. But let's get back to what we were talking about today: toxic work environments. How do you notice that it's affecting your confidence? There are many different ways. And sometimes we put it down to, I'm just going to stay in my corner. I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to mind my own business. I'm going to go to work, do my job, and mind my own business and stay quiet. But a lot of that is a trauma response to being in a toxic work environment. As I'm saying this again, let me just check to make sure that my volume is coming through. It says that I'm live, but I can't actually see anything. I'm going to take it as is. It's swirling around. But yes, I'm just going to be it's quiet. Working. It's working. Yeah. So you can be in an environment where you just think, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to mind my business, sit in my corner and just do my work and just get on with it. That is a response to being in a toxic work environment. And yes, it is important to go to work, do your job and go home. But the fact that you have to say that means that you are responding to something that is not normal, because it is not normal to be in an environment where you are around so many people doing the same things that you have in common, with the mere fact that you're in the same job and you're doing, you're spending so much time with people, to just think that I'm going to go into work, just be quiet and do my job and go home. That's not normal. That is a sign that you are in a toxic work environment. But how does it erode your confidence? You could be in meetings and you are reluctant to speak up. You might have to send an email to a manager or a colleague and you're overthinking it. You are spending so much time with the wording, making sure that everything is precise and correct, because you're not quite sure what you're going to get back. Or you receive an email and now you're reading between the lines as to, what did they really mean by this? There's capitals here. Are they shouting at me? What's the tone of this email? And you start overthinking either everything that you're sending or everything that's received. You haven't done anything wrong, but you start apologizing, or you're questioned about something and your immediate reaction is to start defending. That's a sign that your confidence is being eroded. And you think that you have to work twice as hard just to feel safe. All of that are signs that your confidence is being eroded. And it doesn't mean that you can be long in the tooth. You can be in a job for a very long time and this can happen. I remember within the last year that I was at my corporate job, there was a time when I went into a meeting and I was silent throughout the entire meeting. I spoke only when I really needed to speak. And when I came out of that meeting, my manager said to me, You know, you were quiet, you didn't look yourself. And I explained to them that what had been relayed to me when because I'd just come back from leave and my team had spoken about how badly they had been treated in previous meetings, that they were being talked over and undermined, and just their ideas were just thrown to one side. And it was really bad behavior. And when I came back into that meeting, I was in that space where I just thought, no, I'm not having any of this. But it showed in how I showed up at the meeting. And it was not a good space to be in. But what it really told me is where the manager was saying, you know, you were quite quiet in that. I to sorry, I'm sitting outside and there's people walking past. To be told that, and for other people not to see it, and for other people not to check it, and also for me not to be present at those meetings when things like that had happened to my team, and again other people not check it, was disappointing. And what that did for me initially was force me to feel that I needed to just be quiet, not engage, didn't want to take part in anything that was going to feed into what I saw was bullying, undermining. And in a way it did. It did, even though I'd been there for so long. I'd been in that job for about 17, 18 years at that time. It had started to erode my confidence, and it took me a while to take a step back and think, hold on, I don't need to go down that path. And mentally it can knock you. And mentally I had to step up and make some changes, and that's what I'm going to speak about later. But have you ever noticed what are the behaviors? Have you noticed the behaviors that you display when you have been internalizing toxicity? Because what it can do is, when you are faced with things like that, so for me it was my team being undermined when I wasn't there, and then me coming back and I can see it looks like gaslighting. My first response is probably what they would call a trauma response. My first response is not engaging and being silent, which isn't the best, but that's my response. And then I go away and I reflect, and then I come back with what I need to speak about and how I'm going to address it. What's the way that you react to behavior like that? I'd really like to know. But what that can do is, if you are not in a space where you feel brave enough to challenge it, it means that you can stop trusting yourself, because it can erode your confidence. And by doing that unconsciously, we are giving our power away. We're in those spaces, but we're not standing up in our own power. So the first thing, when it comes to, if you're feeling that you are losing your confidence in those spaces, the first thing is to be aware, and so that you can start reclaiming it. How do you do that? So first of all, you have to be grounded. And grounding, some people think it's like this kind of, frou-frou fairy kind of, thinking. But grounding yourself in the moment is really important. When you are able to, when you identify where you are, and I just had a light bulb moment there, because the first thing is really to identify that where you are is a toxic environment. When you identify that, you have to remind yourself that you are in that environment, but you are not of the environment. You are in it, but you are not part of it. You are in it, it does not reflect you. And you walk into those places telling yourself how you are going to react that day. You have to, before you go into that, at least you can come away and you can go home. When you're going into your work environment, you set the pace, you set the tone for how you're going to show up that day. We know that for many people, when we come home from work, there's that kind of I say joke, but when you come home from work, there's the memes that go around where, you know, that ask the question, do you sit outside for half an hour in your car before you go indoors? And I've done that. I still do that. Doesn't matter where I am. Sometimes, if I've been out shopping and I'm just coming back, I will just sit there for a bit to decompress and then go inside, or I check things on my phone. But sometimes it's just when you do that from work, it's just that you just want to leave all the stuff from work to one side so that you walk into the house and leave all of that outside. When I was working in that toxic environment, I would do that in the morning before I even went into work. So it was just like, there was the detox after work, but I would be driving down the road, playing particular songs, listening to certain music that will get me in a really good frame of mind. Remember, I said that you have to ground yourself and decide that you are choosing peace that day, and remind yourself that you might be in the environment but not of the environment. I would play certain music that will get me into that certain frame of mind, and I would sit in the car park, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for 15 minutes, just grounding myself, knowing that when I walk into that building, I will be in charge of my emotions. I will be in charge of my reactions. And those are things that you have to do if you are in toxic environments, to make sure that you are not just being blown like a leaf in the wind when things are happening in those environments. So, think about taking a deep breath in. And that is literally you starting to own your power. You are in charge of how you react. You are in charge of what you are going to allow to influence and affect you in those spaces. That doesn't mean that you're going to go into work and everybody is now going to treat you with respect, or if you have issues with a manager, that manager isn't going to still, bully you or undermine you or anything like that. But you get to choose how you show up, and you get to choose how you react to it. So it's really important that you choose your space. And by space, I mean your headspace. You choose your reactions and you choose peace, because it's very easy to go the other way for some people. The other thing that you want to think about is your boundaries. And boundaries aren't just putting up walls. Boundaries dictates and makes very clear how you decide to be treated. When we don't have boundaries, every single time we say yes to something when we really want to say no, we are training the other person that it's okay to treat us like that. And so that's where boundaries have to come in. And if you are dealing with bullying, if you are dealing with microaggressions, there are ways to deal with it. And there are always, it doesn't matter how the other person may come across to you, there are always ways to deal with it in a professional way, so that you do not lose your standing, you do not tarnish your reputation at work. I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken to colleagues who have just lost it and just gone and just said, and just the verbal in work. And I would love to say that there's never an occasion where it may get to that, but if you've been worn down for years, I can understand it. But I would still love to say that there's never an occasion for that. It doesn't matter what is being thrown at you. You have to remember where you are. You have to remember that you are a professional. You have to remember that you are an adult, even if the other person forgets that they are. So, and usually it gets that far because you haven't set boundaries from the beginning. And what happens is you take and you take and you take, and you haven't, because you haven't set up that boundaries, you've taken so much, so that now the reservoir of everything that you've taken is now going to overflow and spill out. This is why it's important to set your boundaries from the beginning. Set your boundaries, maintain your boundaries, enforce your boundaries, and don't get upset when people overstep your boundaries or push against your boundaries. That's the whole point of having boundaries. You've put them up so that people know exactly where you stand. They will always test it, they will always push against it. That's the point. They haven't put the boundaries up, you have. So don't get upset when somebody's, leaning against the boundary. They're going to. We get upset because sometimes we just think we don't want to enforce the boundaries. So it comes down to us to enforce it. It comes down to us to maintain it, not necessarily for the other person to respect it. So, you know, boundaries are important. And I'd like you to think about, when you are thinking about being in those spaces, Absolutely love the Caribbean, but it can be kind of noisy at times. Oh gosh. Okay. I don't know if you heard that, but yeah, Caribbean's lovely, but it can be noisy. Boundaries are important, but and think it so sorry, that's what I was going to say. Think about a boundary that you have not set yet that you know that you need to enforce. Where is it that you need a boundary that you have yet to enforce, that you have yet to set up? The other thing that you need to do and remember is about your self-worth, to anchor your self-worth internally. You may be experiencing bullying, you may be being undermined in your job, and that undermining can happen by fellow colleagues. If you're a manager, there are other managers that will undermine you. It just made me think of a story when I was a very new manager and I walked into the office, and there was a more seasoned manager there, and I thought, oh, this is good. I will be able to learn and I will get support as a new manager. Not so. And I remember one of my staff, who again was very seasoned, had been around for a lot longer than I had, very knowledgeable, very experienced. But we had moved into a new way of working. And my member of staff decided that they were going to go to the other manager to query something after I had told them to do it in a particular way in line with the new policy and procedure. The old manager was like, no, 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 you need to do it this way. And after the staff had gone, undermining me to the other manager, and the manager had undermined what I had said and told my staff to do it the other way, they came back to me and wanted me to sign the report, to agree it so it can go forward. That wasn't going to happen. And what I said was, if you are agreeing this when I have said no, this is not going to pass, it's not going to go through, it's not going to be accepted, you sign it. And that was one of the that was me in my early days, understanding that I had to set boundaries because you will be undermined. And not funny enough, actually, I knew it was going to happen. It went that way, and I said, I'm not going to put my name to it because I don't agree with it and that's not in line with the policy. When the other manager signed it and my member of staff put it through, it was rejected, and then they had to come back and do it the way that I had said it and earlier on. So I say that to say that if you are a leader in your organization, undermining can happen, not just with your staff but with other managers as well. So you need to be mindful of that. So whether you are a young leader, whether you are a new leader, whether you are long in the tooth, be mindful of it and be aware that you have to very early on set your boundaries and be confident in your worth, be confident in your skill, be confident in your knowledge and experience, because it's very easy for your confidence to be knocked when something like that happens, especially if it's coming from somebody that you think is more experienced. Like I said, this was happening to me as a new manager. I hadn't even been there for 6 months as a new manager as yet when this had happened, probably within my first 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. And this happened. So it's very important to anchor yourself in your self-worth. For me to stand up and say, no, I'm not doing it, that took a lot, because I needed that camaraderie. I needed the support from the managers who were around me. But I realized at that point that I wasn't going to have it. So it did take a lot for me to push back at what I saw was an older, wiser, experienced manager. But I also recognized it for what it was. And it was undermining. So be mindful that that will happen, and be mindful that whether or not you see yourself as seasoned, whether or not you see yourself as experienced, or the how long you've been there doesn't matter, as long as you have the skill and experience and expertise. Stand in that power. So you have to anchor your self-worth internally. When others devalue you, what you could end up doing, sadly, is performing for approval and not working from purpose, not working from your skills base. You're just doing things for the sake of wanting to get that approval. And that's where being in a toxic work environment can start eroding your confidence. So you have to be mindful of that. Do not allow your value to shrink because somebody else doesn't see it. It's really important that you understand your value and stand on your own skills, stand on your expertise, stand on the experience that you know you have. Whether or not you're standing in front of somebody who's been there for more than 10 years and has that kind of experience on you. And it could help that you even ask yourself or say to yourself, what am I proud of about myself? What do I have? What's my USP? We usually think about USPs when it comes to businesses. But what's your USP as a leader? What makes you different? Whether you like it or not, you don't have to have a business to be a brand. You already are a brand. Your reputation is your brand. So as you were standing in your office, as you were standing in your team, as you are standing in your organization, what is your brand? What's your reputation? Think about the things that you are proud of. Think about your skills, your experience, your knowledge. What do people come to you for? Do not allow your self-worth to be hinged on what others may not see. You're the one who gets to write that script. The third thing that we need to be very clear of when it comes to being in a toxic environment is knowing when it's time to leave. This is one that a lot of people don't always like to talk about, because if you're in a toxic work environment, and especially if your confidence has been knocked, because you can be in a toxic environment but you cannot be part of the drama. So when I spoke about the experience before where there were people coming to fisticuffs, I wasn't in that. That was happening, and as a manager I had to manage it and deal with what was happening. But if you are in a space, actually even being in a toxic environment, so in that, it did have a knock-on effect on my confidence, because as a manager I started internalizing and wondering, was it me? Was it things that I'd done? Are there more that I could do? Not even thinking that I had walked into the space being like this. But for many, when your confidence is being knocked in a toxic environment, there is that feeling that you have to prove yourself. You may be being bullied by a manager. Your work may be being drawn into question. And there is absolutely no way that you want to walk away from that, because you feel that you have to prove that, this is not you. You have nothing to prove to anyone. And I've seen it so many times where maybe things didn't go so well at work. Maybe there were problems that the individual had, and they are in a space where they're trying to get back to the person who they were. They may have had health issues. They may have had relationship issues. They may have had family responsibilities that meant that, their issues of spilled into work. Sorry, I was just looking at a comment. Hi, Marlene. Hi, Marlene. We're not actually speaking about digital income today. We're speaking about toxic work environments. Thank you. I don't know if you've messaged on the wrong thing. But when it knocks your confidence like that, when you are in a space where you feel as if you have to prove yourself, that's usually time for you to go. You want to, the energy and time that you take to feel that you have to right the wrongs against you is energy and time that you can take to move into a space where your value is, where your worth is being valued. And there are so many people, this is what I was just saying a minute ago. There are so many people that I have seen who have been sidetracked and gone down a whole side quest into something that they didn't need to get into, proving that they are the person that they were, trying to disprove a manager who may be bullying, a manager who may be, making their life a living hell, because those managers do and can exist. When what they need to be considering is this environment right for me? Do I need to be here? There is no failure in calling it quits. You are not a failure by being in a toxic work environment, by dealing with microaggressions, by dealing with bullying, by having your confidence knocked and then saying that I will no longer tolerate this type of behavior. And I think that is one of the things that we have to consider. Sometimes, go through the grounding, think about how you can value yourself, think about how you value your worth from an internal space, but also think about, do you belong in that space? Is this a space that you need to be in if you are not being valued for what you bring to the table? You are already good at what you do. You may have had a blip in your career. You may be dealing with somebody who's dealing with their own issues and their own demons, and you're in a workspace where you're no longer moving forward, you're feeling stuck, you're not interested in promotions. It no longer, think about the things. Does it even fit with your values anymore? But you're there because it's comfortable. And this is where you have to have some real conversations with yourself in terms of, does this fit me anymore? There are so many people who are in work and in work environments where they are struggling, where they no longer fit anymore. They are literally like that far away from giving a crap about what is going on in the job. They don't care anymore whether or not what the meetings are saying or what they're being told to do. You're literally just on a hamster wheel going round and round and round. But then you start experiencing, bullying. You're in this toxic environment, and then you feel, no, I have to prove myself. Go get another job. No, I have to prove myself. Get out of that organization. No, I'm going to prove them right. Many corporate organizations are designed in such a way that you will never win. Even if you are right, you will never win. It's not designed for that. I've sat in spaces where my office was adjoining another manager, and I would hear the table banging, and the tone of the voice was just totally rude. I reported it. Yes, I did. I reported it and said that it was totally unprofessional. But I sat there and I listened to this coming through a wall where a manager was speaking to staff in that manner. And I knew that if that member of staff had complained and said, this is how the manager was speaking to me, the only thing the manager had to do was say that I was holding them into account for their work. And there was absolutely nothing that that member of staff could say that would counteract that, because the manager would just say, I'm just holding them to account for their work. I knew what I heard. That member of staff knew how they felt. And there are times when you have to look at, do I call it quits? And this is why I'm spending so much time on this section, is you have to know when it's time to leave. It's kind of like being in a relationship. And I say this so much when I'm speaking about work environments, and especially toxic work environments. They are so alike to toxic relationships that when love is no longer being served in a relationship, the same way as respect is no longer being served in a job, where you are being bullied, where there are microaggressions, you have to know when it's time to draw the line and walk away. If you were not in that toxic space, ask yourself, what would you be doing right now? How would you feel right now? Because think about how you feel at this instance. You might be watching this and you've just come home from work, or you might be watching this at work. How does it feel to be in an environment where you're not being valued? How would you feel if the 4th of November 2026 came around and you were still in that space? How would you feel if the 4th of March came around and you were still in that space? Is this what you want? Is this what you're worth? What would life feel like if you were not dealing with the microaggressions, the micromanagements, the bullying, the undermining? If you were in a space where you felt that you can share freely, if you were in a space where you were psychologically safe, if you were in a space where you can share an idea, it may not be 100% right, it may not be what the party line is, but it would be accepted, it could be discussed, where you felt free to share ideas, to be yourself. You know, the whole bring yourself to work, bring your whole self to work. If you actually felt you could, it doesn't mean that you have to, but you actually felt that you could. If you were in a space where that could happen, how would that feel? Does it feel like that now? If it doesn't, there could be some things that you could do to make it better. But sometimes you have to look at, is this where I need to be? Is it my time to call it quits? Is it my time to leave? Do not see, never see leaving as failure. Leaving can be freedom, and that can be your ticket out. That could be how you own your wings. Because there are many people who I remember an example of, it's a story. We were in at work. I'm trying to say it in a way that I keep it as neutral as possible. But I was in my old workplace, and there was a member of staff from a different office who came in, and they were visibly suffering physically, and to the point where we hadn't seen this individual in so long, and they were walking with a stick and they looked disheveled, didn't look physically well at all. And I was standing in an area, and there were a couple of members of staff behind me. Actually, this we had just had a fire drill, and so we were standing milling around, and behind me were a couple of members of staff, and I heard the whispering, and one of them said, it's the organization that did this to them. And I'm listening to this, and the talk was going on, that the reason why this person had come to this state where physically they were suffering and they just was not well at all was because of the organization. And I turned around and said, right, we could say that. We know that this individual may have had a difficult time in the organization, but we all have a choice. Yes, it's not always that easy to just pick up and leave, but we have to recognize the signs a lot earlier on to decide when it's time to cut our losses, to decide when it's not worth our fight, to decide when it's not worth our physical, our mental, and our emotional health. If you're in a space where on Sunday you are dreading Monday, where you don't do anything on a Sunday because you already know that you need your energy for those 5 days ahead, where you only literally have half a day on a weekend because Saturday is when you put in the bulk of everything that you have to do. You might have a little bit of time on a Saturday, and Sunday is you dreading Monday. You could be in a toxic work environment, and you need to start looking at, what do I need to change in my life? If you are Sorry, somebody's just stopped outside my door. If you are in those spaces where you are starting to feel headaches for no reason, where your work is starting to impact on your quality of life, on your sleep, your body is actually giving you signs that this is not where it needs to be anymore. Sadly, our brain doesn't always catch up, and we need to get better at noticing the signs that we are in spaces that are no longer serving us. So the longest segment of this video is really looking at where we are expending our energy and expending our time, and really being truthful with ourselves as to, Are we staying to prove something to ourselves, or are we staying to prove something to somebody else who will never see our worth? And that's for relationships and that's for jobs. If you are staying to prove to somebody or an organization who may not and never will see your worth, then that's wasted time, wasted energy, wasted gifts, a waste of your skills, a waste of your experience, a waste of your knowledge. So ask yourself again, what would freedom look like for you if you were not in that toxic work environment? Because toxic work environments don't just take up your time, they take away your sense of self. It stops you from reasoning properly, which is why when you're in a toxic environment, you don't quite, you don't take that time away to step away to think about, do I really need it? Do I really need to be here? You start wanting to prove yourself to the other person when it makes no sense because they're never going to see your worth. You start devaluing yourself because now you're trying to prove yourself to somebody who's never going to see your worth. So this is why you need to reclaim your power. This is why sometimes you need to look at who deserves access to you. Do I need to continually come into a space where my work is not being appreciated? Do they need access to me? And remove yourself or make plans in how you will remove yourself from that environment. Guard yourself in the meantime, because you have to survive those toxic work environments for the period that you're going to be there, but make a plan to get out if it is one of those kind of environments where you know that it's not going to be getting any better. And just be mindful and know that you can rebuild your confidence. You have to set boundaries and to walk away because you need to have your peace as your priority. So if you were able to get to the end of this video, it's a little bit of a long one, drop a blue heart in the chat so I know that you got as far as the end of this video. And I would love to hear from you. What are the ways that you have survived or are surviving in toxic work environments? How do you protect your energy? Thank you very much. And I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.